Okay, welcome to attachment. So an attachment is a emotional reciprocal bond between infant and caregiver, usually the mother. So the first thing we look at is caregiver-infant interactions, so how the baby interacts with the mother. So you'll look at things like reciprocity, interactional synchrony, caregiver ease. So these are ways of how the mother and baby communicate with each other. So, for example, if a baby smiles, the caregiver will smile back, and that reinforces the behavior. Interactional synchrony, that's the timing and coordination of the exchanges. So when the caregiver and infant mirror each other, it's a bit like a dance. You'll look at other things like caregiver ease, which is where the mother will talk in a higher pitched voice at the baby, and this is a cross-cultural behavior. So these are behaviors that help to form that attachment bond. Now, a bond you can have straight away with the baby, whereas an attachment takes time to develop. So the caregiver-infant interactions are ways that help to create that bond and then ultimately form an attachment. So Schaffer's stages of attachment. So Schaffer identified different stages. You got stage 1, up to 6 weeks pre-attachment stage. This is where the babies show indiscriminate responsiveness to all human contact. They display behaviors like crying, smiling, grasping. These are ways to keep the adult close. Obviously, they can't look after themselves. Stage 2, attachment in the making, 6 weeks to 6 to 8 months. The infants begin to recognize familiar people and respond in a positive way to them, and they develop preferences for familiar caregivers, but they don't show separation anxiety yet. Stage 3, clear-cut attachment, 6 to 8 months up to 18 months. So the infants show specific attachment to primary caregivers, they get separation anxiety, and they use the caregiver as a secure base to explore. So they might explore the room, but they know the mother is there. That's their secure base. And then stage 4 is the multiple attachment stage, 18 months upwards. So children will develop multiple attachments to other people, and this allows them to build those relationships with other people. So they might become attached to their siblings, their grandparents, friends, things like that. So multiple attachments and the father's role. A lot of the research was initially focused on mothers, whereas obviously they excluded the fathers. So there's a lot of psychology research now into the role of the father. But the father typically has a different role. They see more of a playmate, whereas the mother, the children typically go to them for comfort and security. And other attachments like grandparents, fathers, maybe more to do with play and, like a playmate. And the research by Grossman found that father-child play sensitivity at age 2 predicted better social and emotional outcomes at age 16. There's also research looking at how relationships without a father affect behavior at school as well. It can lead to emotional and social issues. Okay, two classic studies on animals, Lorenz and Harlow. So Lorenz researches into imprinting. So Lorenz had a batch of eggs, and he split them into 2 groups. One hatched in front of their mother, the other half hatched in front of Lorenz, and the goslings that hatched with Lorenz followed him, whereas the goslings that hatched in front of the genetic mother followed the genetic mother. So this is what Lorenz called imprinting. So this has to happen within so many hours of being born. So normally the first big moving object they see, they attach to. Harlow studied rhesus monkeys. He separated them from their mothers and gave them a wire mother or a wire mother with a cloth, and that gave comfort, whereas the wire mother on its own just gave food. And Harlow found that the monkey would spend most of the time, about 18, 19 hours a day, on the cloth mother and only go across to the wire mother for biological survival for food, which suggests that comfort is more important than food to form attachments. So this cupboard love theory that suggested that the person that feeds the baby is going to form an attachment. Contact comfort seems to be more important than who feeds them. Learning theory. So learning theory, you've got classical and operant conditioning. So classical conditioning works through association. So the infant associates the caregiver with food, which is an unconditioned stimulus, and that provides pleasure, which is an unconditioned response. Then eventually the caregiver alone produces the conditioned response of pleasure. Operant conditioning is based on what's the word? Operant conditioning reinforcements. So you can get positive and negative reinforcements. So the caregiver is feeding and holding, that reduces comfort. So remember that negative reinforcement is removing something, and positive reinforcement is providing pleasure. So if the baby is crying and the mother wants to remove the crying, and she feeds the baby, so the negative reinforcement is removing the crying, that the baby gets food, which is a positive reinforcer, and it's kind of like a perfect system. So classical and operant conditioning are a way to explain attachment formation through association and then through reinforcements. Donald and Miller propose that attachment is a learned drive, developing because the mother satisfies the infant's primary drives like hunger. Bowlby's monotropic theory. So this is based on evolution. Attachment has an evolutionary advantage. So all these behaviors like crying, smiling, cooing, they're all ways of keeping infants safe and keeping the mother close to them so they can survive, because they're basically helpless and they need an adult with them. The monotropic theory or monotropy, infants are predisposed to form one primary attachment, usually the mother, and that attachment is different to other attachments, because the argument is that the primary attachment serves as a template for any future relationships. Social releases we talked about before, smiling, cooing, crying, they're just ways to elicit a response from the mother. So if the baby starts crying, the mother will go over to them. And obviously, if the sensitive responsiveness is higher, the attachment is probably going to be better and better for the baby as they grow up emotionally. Critical period on the internal working model. So the critical period is the time frame where attachments needs to form. So Bowlby proposed a critical period, which he later called a sensitive period, for between 3 and 6 months, extending to about 3 years. So it's a bit of a longer process compared to some other animals. During that time, the infants are biologically predisposed to form attachments. And if it doesn't occur, it can have, Bowlby argued that it could have severe, irreversible consequences emotionally, socially, and psychologically. The internal working model acts as a template for how future relationships are going to be. So the the model that the child develops depends on the relationships that they see with their own sort of parents. So through the interactions with the caregivers, the baby will develop an internal working model of relationships. So it could be to do with the reliability and responsiveness of other people, self as worthy or unworthy, and how relationships generally function. So if you're in a healthy relationship with two parents, say, that's going to be your template of what relationships are like. If you were in, say, a single parent family, then that would affect your template of how you think relationships are, etc. So it's a bit like a model of the world, how you think relationships are going to be. Mary Ainsworth carried out a study called the Strange Situation. So this looked at babies and how they react to strangers and separation and reunion. So it looks at stranger anxiety, separation anxiety, and reunion behavior, and also how they explored. So the Strange Situation is a controlled observation, and they were assessing the quality of attachments between 12 to 18-month-old children, and it basically involved 8 3-minute episodes. And like I say, the behaviors that they were looking at is the separation anxiety, stranger anxiety, reunion, and how they explore. And based on this, Mary Ainsworth argued there are 3 types of attachments: type A, type B, and type C. Type A is insecure avoidant, type B is secure, and type C is insecure resistant. So we'll look at what those mean now. So a type A, the child will show little distress when the mother leaves, avoid or ignore on reunion, and treat strangers similarly to the mother. Associated with rejecting, unresponsive caregiving. Type B is the most common across all cultures. So in type B, secure attachment, they use the mother as a secure base, show distress when the mother leaves, easily comforted on reunion, and prefer the mother over strangers. And this is associated with a sensitive, responsive caregiver. And type C, insecure resistant, clingy, poor exploration, extremely distressed on separation, difficult to comfort on reunion, and they may show anger towards the mother. There's also a type D, which is disorganized, where they don't kind of have any set sort of pattern. Now, one of the main studies by Van Eysendorn and Kroonenberg was a meta-analysis of the Strange Situation. This was carried out in 32 studies from 8 countries. And secure attachment was the most common across all cultures. And there were some big differences between type A and type C, depending on whether you're an individualistic or collectivist culture. For example, German infants showed higher rates of avoidant attachment, and Japanese and Israel kibbutz showed higher rates of resistant attachment. So there's some cross-cultural variations. German emphasizes independence, whereas Japanese emphasizes closeness. Communal child rearing in kibbutz may affect attachment formations too, from Israel. And Van Eysendorn and Kroonenberg found there was a 1.5 times bigger variation within a culture than across culture. Although if you actually look at the original study, there were some big differences in the number of studies from certain countries. For example, I think in the USA they had 18 studies, where in Britain they only had 1. Bowlby's maternal deprivation hypothesis. So if you're deprived of an attachment, Bowlby was interested in this and how it affects the child. So like I said before, if you fail to form an attachment or you're maternally deprived, it can have severe, irreversible, long-lasting consequences emotionally, socially, and cognitively. And Bowlby carried out a study called 44 Juvenile Thieves. They found that a lot of the delinquents had experienced separation from their mothers. He also cited that evidence for children in hospitals and institutions who showed signs of distress and developmental delays. So, failing to form an attachment when you're deprived, either short-term or long-term, can have consequences. But there is a case of little John who went through what's called the PDD model, protest, despair, detachment. So it might be worth looking at that one. And how little John reacted to his mother going in hospital for, I think it was a week or 10 days to have a baby, and how he reacted when she came back. And that's called the PDD model, protest, despair, detachment. So Bowlby later distinguished between different types of deprivation. So you've got privation is when you've never formed an attachment. So like orphans, like Russell's study into Romanian orphans, and deprivation where you've lost it, either temporarily or permanently through death or divorce. So this is a Romanian orphan study by Rutter. So this looked at how children develop when they're orphans. So it's called the English and Romanian adoptees by Rutter. So if you're adopted before 6 months, that tends to be not too bad. You can kind of recover. If you're adopted after 6 months, it can show lasting effects, cognitive issues, attachment problems, quasi-autism. Some children show remarkable resilience despite early deprivation. There are several case studies. You've got the Caregiver twins, might be worth looking at that one, who had privation, and also Jeannie is another one who also suffered privation. Influence on childhood relationships. So obviously the attachment that you have early on can affect your relationship later on because of your internal working model that's created. That can shape expectations about future relationships. Peer relationships. So the research found that securely attached infants were rated as more popular and less aggressive by teachers. So secure seems to be the kind of best, really, type B. And a good way to remember those is type A for avoidant, B is secure, and type C is insecure resistant. Teacher relationships. Early attachment patterns influence how children relate to teachers and other authority figures. So if you're secure, type B, they typically form better relationships with teachers and adapt better to school environments. Or insecure, children may struggle with classroom behaviour and academic engagement. And finally, influence on adult relationships. Obviously, the attachment style that you have as a child can affect you later on. So Hazen and Shaver carried out the love quiz, and they found that secure adults, 56%, find it easier to get close to others and are comfortable with dependency. 25% type A, avoidant, are uncomfortable with closeness and find it difficult to trust others, whereas insecure resistant desire extreme closeness and fear abandonment. So this suggests that the attachment style that you have can also affect you later on. And the adult attachment interview is where they interview adults and then ask them about their attachment when they were younger with their parents, say. And the attachment styles. So the parents' attachments representations predict their children's attachment styles with about 75% accuracy, suggesting that attachment patterns can be transmitted across generations. So this intergenerational transmission. So it's kind of passed down. So hopefully you've learned something new about attachment there, and I'll see you on another video.